Hey everybody, welcome to Simul Media Live. My name is Matt Collins. It's great to have you with us wherever you may be watching, however you may be watching, whether you're with us on LinkedIn or on Twitter, Periscope, Zoom. It means a lot to all of us that you take time out of a very busy day to come and hang out with us and meet some interesting people and learn some things that we hope represent something that's valuable to you. So those of you who've been watching this for a while may recall a conversation I had with Jeff Jarvis, who works for the Cooney School of Journalism here in New York City. And Jeff and I were talking about, at that time, the state of the news media, much earlier on in the trajectory of the pandemic and the economic fallout that it has led to. And one of Jeff's rallying cries, if I can use that term, was to advertisers directly, not to abandon the news, not to run in the name of brand safety or under the cover of brand safety. Don't run from the news. That the news not only was providing an important social good, but actually was attracting more and more audience that represented a fantastic opportunity for advertisers who wanted to connect with their customers. And I've been thinking an awful lot about that because, of course, every week Simul Media has been publishing insights about changes in television consumption by vertical or by genre. So we see, for example, week over week changes in how many viewers are watching the news or entertainment or kids or sports programming. And we've seen just tremendous growth in all of those segments, but including news. And once again, as a result of the national unrest, and of course its proximal cause, the murder of George Floyd, we have seen another surge in television news viewing. And it just seemed to me a really appropriate time to revisit this question about the appropriateness of advertising in the news and the opportunity that it represents. And it occurs to me that in many instances, of course, we'll get into this in the questions and answers that follow here with our special guests, that a lot of times advertisers make decisions about brand safety that oftentimes boil down to what someone high up in an organization considers to be safe or not. It ends up being a very personal decision, not necessarily one that's fact-based. And so we wanted to share the facts. We wanted to share insights about what customers' attitudes about the news are and about advertising generally, but also in the news. And we wanted to talk about innovation in the newsroom. You think about the product itself, the platform, and how newsrooms are adapting to this moment. And so I am so fortunate today to be joined by three guests who bring a very special perspective on this. I'm joined today by Seth Geiger, who is founder of Smith Geiger LLC, a market research firm that knows this space awfully well. Nicole Bergen, who is the founder of Elevate, which is a division of Smith Geiger focused on revenue and advertising research. And Andrew Hayward, who is a friend of Simul Media, a member of our board of advisors. Andrew is senior researcher for TV news at the Cronkite School, Arizona State University, and the former president of CBS News. And so it's really great for all to see all three of you here. Thank you so much for joining us on Simul Media Live.
It's a pleasure being here, Matt.
Great to have you. Seth, I want to begin with you. In March, you shared, maybe conducted or shared some research about where local audiences in local markets were turning for news. And this, of course, is a very consequential time because we were thinking back to that moment. We were all of us just a matter of days into various stages of shelter in place orders, and we knew a heck of a lot less about where coronavirus was going and how severe it was going to be. And so that's certainly when we saw here at Simul Media, starting around March 12th, massive surges in the number of people going to broadcast news, cable news for their coverage. But you've done some research to determine where local audiences like to go for their news and their information. Can you tell us a bit about what you found?
Sure. We've been tracking this effectively since COVID became a high impact story. Now, Americans had been paying attention to COVID as early as late January. About 55% of the country were already attending to the story. But March 10th is the day effectively when the world changed for most Americans. It's when we saw the biggest decrease in consumer confidence and sentiment. Certainly the markets were taking significant and consistent hits at that time. And of course, we saw many of our regular pastimes, whether it's NBA basketball or late night television, see a significant either cancellation or reorientation and re-engineering to stay on the air. Back in March, it was a really interesting time. There was almost an immediate and a dramatic expansion of local news consumption at that moment in time. Prior to March 10th, about 62% of Americans in the demo consumed local news on TV, about 73% local news on any platform. Those numbers jumped respectively almost immediately to 82% of Americans consuming local news on TV, 91% on at least one platform, and they've sustained pretty well throughout the pandemic. We are in a post-peak world now in that the volume of news that's being consumed did back off. That's true of local news as well as many other platforms. But we're still in very much a heightened environment that's significantly greater than it was prior to the pandemic. One of the other unique attributes of what was happening is that there was not only a unifying of the country in terms of making local news their primary destination for news and information, but there was a unified set of sentiments and almost emotions that the country was going through. We started with a sense of shock and confusion because things happened and changed so quickly, and local news became the primary destination to help navigate and understand what was happening in my local area. So this was a global event that was being processed at a local level. As we got into April and we were tracking things, it became more about agency. How do I gain a sense of control back in this environment? And as we tracked it into May, it became about anticipating what's next and a sense of caution. So over time, we saw a fragmentation by demographics that did not exist back in March and early April. Younger news consumers went back to primarily being reliant on social media platforms and digital platforms. Folks in the 35 to 44-year-old age range backed off a little bit. And we saw folks in the older cut of the demo even increasing their television consumption. So what had been a relatively unified, homogeneous response came a fragmented response. And in many respects, that mirrors how this story has become fragmented along political lines and partisan lines as well. Where early on, there was very, very high levels of agreement about the nature of this and the public health concerns around it. But we've seen that fragmenting as well, with folks on the right questioning and demanding things opening up. But even with that, only 15% of Americans were supporting the protesters at the state houses back in April and in May. What we're seeing today is a protracted news cycle, but that cycle is really being driven, obviously, by Black Lives Matters and police misconduct and all the other factors around that. And news has obviously covered that story very, very heavily. The reality is COVID and Black Lives Matters are not independent stories. While the vast majority, better than 90%, have been impacted by the pandemic, the reality is the distribution of that impact has not been even. So better than 40% of African Americans and Latinos know somebody who's been infected. Only about 28% of whites. So many of the undercurrents that have now come to light around the Black Lives Matters and the George Floyd murder are intersecting very much with the pandemic as well. And local news is playing a fundamental role here. One last point I'll make about local news: by far the most trusted platform of any news platform. And that is incredibly meaningful to advertisers, and they should understand and embrace that environment as particularly important, a particularly important place to be.
Yes, that's exactly right. And Bill Harvey made that point several times before, too, about the role that the advertisers can play in the medium. And he's also given very specific advice about how to thread that needle, specifically what kind of creative tone to strike. But this is a really good segue to you, Nicole, and the research that you've been doing. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, that advertisers all have, I think, some notion of brand safety, and and it's relatively easy to spot issues of brand safety at the extreme. Advertisers, of course, don't want their product to be shown mid-roll in a neo-Nazi demonstration or propaganda piece. But there's a lot more gray area in this, and you've done some research to determine customer attitudes towards advertising at this time, and I'm wondering if you can share some of the top line of what you've been learning, Nicole.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I mean, at the end of the day, the advertising opportunity in news is great, right? There's a huge benefit to taking advantage of these massive audiences that are available. And in our tracking research, America is quite clear that they're ready to hear from these brands. In fact, 55% of Americans say that they actually feel reassured when they hear from companies, brands, and local businesses in this environment. So I think especially pre-election, with all of this inventory and really opportunity cost, right? This massive audience that's available to them at a relatively affordable cost, it's actually a mistake to not take advantage of this situation, of these eyeballs that are available to them. And as Seth said, people see local news as a trusted source. Why not associate your brand with something like that? And America's ready to see it.
Nicole, you mentioned Americans' readiness to participate in advertising, to have advertising fed to them. But if I play devil's advocate for a moment and I'm the CMO of a brand that's spending, say, $10 million a month on television advertising, and I say, oh my gosh, how do I take my commercial for a consumer good, a roll-on antiperspirant, for example? Can I really air that in and amidst coverage of hospital scenes or of looting or of police press conferences? Is that really a good idea? And I think, well, I know your research says yes, but how would you answer me, or how would you answer a CMO who's asking you that question directly?
Well, listen, you have to be sensitive to the situation. You cannot take a commercial that you created 6 or 12 months ago, dust it off, and air it today. There has to be some focus on the climate. But America also doesn't want to hear things like we're in this together or the new normal. They really want brands and companies to just cut through the clutter, say, hey, we know you're having a tough time. Here's a $1,000 rebate. They want to see the return of the deal. They're not ready for people yelling at them, sale, sale, sale. And obviously in the climate that you just described, that wouldn't be appropriate. But there is this balance. We have to be careful that we're not too soft and generalized, that we talk about what the product benefits are in the climate that we're in. So I think there is an opportunity to have a message in this space, but it does have to be mindfully constructed.
Let's talk about the news product itself. And I have to say that one of the things that I've come to look forward to the most, especially over the last 12 weeks, is receiving my weekly newsletter from the Cronkite School, to which Andrew is a regular contributor. Andrew, of course, a veteran of news organizations in a leadership capacity, and writes regularly about really fascinating innovation that is coming out of especially local newsrooms. But I think that the innovation there almost certainly will start to bubble up to news organizations at a broader level too, at a national level. Andrew, I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about some of the innovation that stands out most to you. And here's your opportunity to talk to advertisers and agencies who might have questions about the news product or the platform itself as a worthy vehicle for their advertising. What should they know about what's changing in the world of news production and how it's distributed?
Thanks, Matt. I'll give that a crack. First of all, it's fascinating to hear what Seth and Nicole have to say about the demand side So I'll try to focus on the supply side of the equation. What are news organizations doing, maybe doing differently in response, certainly to the pandemic? First of all, there was an extraordinary flurry of technological innovation just in response to the restrictions that the pandemic imposed. It was extraordinary how quickly stations adapted to having to work from home, not be able to gather together in the newsroom. That is just a testament to the ingenuity and adaptability of stations. But what's been striking in addition to that is a migration towards a deeper sense of, let's call it, civic responsibility and community service. And it's not to suggest that stations didn't do that before. Obviously, there's a wide range of community service among stations, but we've all heard the slogans like "We're on your side" and so on. In this case, this is about slogans. I think very quickly, as Seth's research demonstrates as well, local television news became a vital source of information and resource for people who wanted more information about this unprecedented in any of our lifetimes event. So a trend we'd already been seeing in our research work, we're in the third year of our project researching local TV news innovation, really accelerated, which is towards differentiation, towards enterprise reporting, towards original ways to serve the public in meaningful ways. I think the influx of younger viewers, which obviously will vary, as Seth described, is a great recognition on the part of people who don't normally run home to watch the 5, 6, or 11, that local television news can be invaluable in understanding what's going on in their communities. And stations, as they experiment with digital platforms and who's consuming what where, have used the pandemic, I think, as a great opportunity to reach viewers and users who don't normally watch their TV shows, but appreciate the kind of journalism that they do. So, I'm focused on the editorial side, not the advertising side. We have two experts here on the panel, who know that much better than I do. But certainly, as a marketer or advertiser, there's very little good to be said, if anything, about the pandemic. But one positive benefit has been an accelerated evolution towards a local news that has deep, meaningful, ongoing connections with the community. And that strikes me as exactly the kind of place that an advertiser would like to see her or his messages also appear. And I don't think local TV news is going to fall back into some of the more superficial, formulaic habits of yesteryear. I think it's going to be too important to stay connected to communities now that the need for that has been so clearly established.
We're talking
Matt,
today.
if I could just weigh
sorry,
in.
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Yeah.
We work with over 100 TV stations across the country and have touched literally hundreds with our research as part of this. It's certainly been a testament to the stations to step up, as Andrew alluded to, and be able to implement the technology to pull this off. But I think the more important comment in all this, and certainly Andrew did mention this, is we don't see stations going back to a pre-COVID time in terms of the way they handicap their role and responsibility in their communities and how they're serving their audiences. This is a time where personal relevance around news coverage, and news coverage that fundamentally helps audiences stay safe, make decisions, feel that greater sense of control in their lives, and be more connected to their communities, is really the new mandate here. And I do believe that stations have recognized the importance of this. And we're going to see a different kind of local news emphasis moving forward here, whether it's in our linear delivery or in our OTT platforms or on our digital platforms as well. So this has been a huge catalyst, and I think we're going to start to see ongoing change and a much higher level of relevance coming out of these local newsrooms.
I'm joined today by Seth Geiger of Smith Geiger Research, Nicole Bergen of Elevate Research, and Andrew Hayward of the Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University. If you have a question for any of these three people, please feel free to jot it down however you're watching. If you're watching on LinkedIn, just put it there on Zoom Periscope, you can put it there. We've got eyes on all those channels. So if you've got a question you'd like to throw at any of these three, jot it down and we'll make sure we get it before we end. And if for whatever reason we can't get to your question, I will make sure we ask it off the air and that we publish the answer in an upcoming blog on simulmedia.com. I want to clear up a couple of terms that just popped up, which I'm not familiar with. Andrew, I want to start with you. You mentioned enterprise reporting. What does that mean?
So original reporting, reporting that's not purely derivative, either merely covering an event without adding anything to it, or taking a story out of the newspaper and just translating it into television terms. I use it instead of investigative reporting because I think it actually covers a much broader array of stories. It's stories in which a journalist has actually done some legwork, as it used to be called, more likely Zoom work or phone work for a lot of reporters now, but has actually added a specific set of insights, angles, revelations, done some excavation to bring something additional to the viewer. I think what Seth described so eloquently just now is going to be the trend. I think the same old stuff is not going to cut it. And we're not just talking about younger viewers who come in and out occasionally based on need. People, now that they've seen how responsive local TV news can be, relevant, to use Seth's term, we're not going to go back to warehouse fires where nobody was hurt or fender benders that caused the traffic jam. Yeah, there may still be mentions of those, but no station can build a sustainable reputation on that. And that trend is very good for the viewers. I think it's good for the democracy. And to the point of this discussion, I think it's good for the people who support news with their advertising dollars.
I think that's exactly right, Andrew. You just sort of peeled the aha moment over my head. You just captured it perfectly, that there's a virtuous cycle that's building. That as the quality of the product, which is improving to meet the expectations of a changed consumer base, gets better and consumers reward that with more of their attention, it creates a richer and more high quality environment for advertisers to slide in. I want to transfer this conversation a bit to not just changes in the product and the expectations that now newsrooms have of how they will serve their viewers. Let's talk about changes in perhaps in viewer habits, or dispelling some myths about viewer habits. And I suspect both you, Nicole, and you, Seth, have a point of view about what viewers actually do expect and how they're thinking these days versus the norm. Nicole, I want to start with you. When people talk to you or ask you questions about the typical viewer today, what are some of the myths or misconceptions which immediately come out based on the questions they're asking you?
It's a great question, Matt. And especially in our focus group research, we hear it so colorfully. Consumers, Americans, they're in this state of hope, right? We've had a lot happen to them in the last few months with the coronavirus and some of the other things that Andrew and Seth have talked about, but they really are seeking hope in this environment, and they want to hear from advertisers about how they're going to make their life easier. People are going to be pulling back perhaps on travel with airlines, but that doesn't mean they're not going to travel. They're interested in staycations. 63% of America says, hey, I'm thinking about looking around my area for a place to relax. People are investing in their homes. 37% of Americans tell us that they're inspired to do a home improvement project in this environment to make their home a more relaxing sanctuary type place. In fact, I was speaking to a focus group respondent just last week who said, I started a garden in my backyard and it became a $3,000 project in a blink of an eye. So people are looking to spend money, and they need to hear from brands and advertisers about what deals and options, deferred payment is going to be available to them to make these purchases.
Nicole, you've also got some really rich insights about sports viewers and where they've gone in the absence of live sports. Our research at Simul Media showed that they haven't gone away. They just watch other things. Is that what you're seeing too?
Yeah, let's take a look at this slide that I have prepared about displaced sports viewers, if we could, here, and I'll share with you some numbers. Are we able to pull that up?
Yeah, Cliff, why don't we pull up the one about sports viewers?
And
that'll
if
be
not,
coming
I
up
can
here.
just, oh, here we go.
Here we go.
So you can see here, yeah, so you can see here up on the screen. Now, this is among sports fans, people who said on a scale of 1 to 10, they're an 8, 9, or 10 avid sports fan. 84% of them told us that they're watching news and information right now. 81% classic sitcoms, 78% crime dramas. And if you look at all of the various sports entities like NFL, Olympics, that's a big one, right? We've got a lot of displaced Olympics money. Where could that be reinvested for advertisers and brands? Well, I would argue news and information. There's a massive audience available, as Seth and Andrew has already talked about. And these people are available. They didn't just disappear from their TV sets, as some might think. 84% of avid sports fans are saying they're watching news and information. And it's pretty consistent across all genres, as you see on the screen, between NBA, Olympics, NFL. So those eyeballs are available. They're just in different programming.
And a lot of it in news,
Indeed.
which, by the way, I don't think we didn't script it that way. Of course, that's just the way the numbers broke, but it does show the power of the medium. Seth, what about you? What are potential clients, advertisers, agencies, or just interested parties asking you about audience behavior that suggests that maybe they're operating under some assumptions that need not be?
You know, it's really interesting, Matt. I'll even question the concept of brand safety or brand neutrality in this environment. I think not speaking up is in a way speaking up, especially as we get into issues of racial equality, certainly as it pertains to the public health issues. So I think American consumers want to know that the brands are actually in their camp and on their side and understand the nature of what it is they're dealing with. Now, we've talked to thousands and thousands of Americans the last couple of months. And even with the sentiments around uncertainty and fear and concern, there's also an underlying sentiment of gratitude for my family, gratitude for what I do have. And we've clearly seen that Americans have been able to a certain degree, rise above meet the challenge, rise above the occasion, and find a way of resuming a certain type of new reality. Nicole alluded to it, the idea of the new normal is not something people are buying into. They understand that things are changing and in flux, and it's very dynamic. This may have been a sentiment that was mostly felt by millennials, and it included broader brands. It included certainly news brands. But millennials weren't just watching news to be informed, like a baby boomer may have been, but they were watching news to try and ascertain where they stand on an issue and what they should potentially be doing and what kind of action they should be taking. They expect that same level of engagement and commitment from the brands that they're engaged with. And I just think that insight around the relationship to news and the relationship to the brand is something that advertisers need to really start to recognize and do it in a meaningful way, as opposed to doing it in a surface way where it just feels like a flavor of the month.
It's a very
Matt, and if I can
add
to that, Matt, I'm smiling because it's so true. America wants to hear from brands and companies about how they're going to make their life easier. So reminding them of their misery or how difficult the time is, they don't want to hear that. They want to hear, how are you going to make my life more comfortable? What's the deal? What's the deferred payment method? What are the benefits of your products? Help me be more comfortable.
If you have a question for Seth or Nicole or Andrew, you can ask it however you're watching. We've got eyes on those channels, and this is a great time to ask an audience question because we have one here. This comes from Jenna, and Jenna asks a question really for you, Andrew. She wants to know, are the innovations that are coming up in some of the local newsrooms that you've been following, are they easily transferable to the national level? Is this the sort of transference that happens? Do the national news outlets pay attention to the local and see it as a source for innovation, or are these likely to be sort of happening in independent labs, if you will?
I think they certainly can be translated, and the technical innovations, including working remotely, we've seen on national programs too. But without being negative about cable news, it is a different animal, and especially in prime time, it really builds its business model around polarization and around feeding a certain part of the audience a particular point of view, backed obviously up by both opinion and reporting. I think in local news, what's really striking is it really is broadcasting. It's really trying to bring a whole community a invaluable service to do exactly what Nicole was describing and what Seth was describing, which is to be helpful at a time when the world seems in disarray. So I think we have to make distinctions. The national broadcast networks, they do a lot of original reporting. I think they've also done a good job of covering the story. But given how community-based the impact of not just the pandemic, but also now the aftermath of the George Floyd murder are, local news plays a unique role in people's lives. They're recognizing it, and I think stations are rising to the occasion. And so I think knowing that local has a distinctive role to play is something that advertisers should be mindful of. They're not all the same. It's not just one bucket called news and information.
We are just about out of time for the program today. But before we adjourn, I want to have each one of you talk a bit about how people can learn more about you and the work that you're doing. Seth, what's the best way for people who want to get in touch with you or learn more about Smith Geiger? What should they do?
Well, you can certainly email me. It's simply seth@smithgeiger.com. My Twitter handle is @SethGeiger. I'm on LinkedIn. I'd look forward to hearing from any of you. We've really tried to distribute this information as broadly as we can. And so we've made it available to clients, non-clients. And I just think it's very important to understand the context and the moment that we are living in right now. This is clearly a moment in time. I feel like 2020 is going to be remembered as that moment when the world changed. And in part, it's because of the pandemic, and in part, it's because how we are responding to the influences and the impact of those things around us. And I do believe local news has risen to the occasion in many, many ways.
Nicole, how about you? How can people learn more about you and Elevate?
Thanks, Matt. Email info@growwithelevate.com. You obviously can follow us on LinkedIn for our latest insights and information. And we're also on Twitter @growwithelevate. We really specialize on advertising voice. So coming out of this situation, if you want to get a pulse on your advertising, is it resonating with your region or America broadly? Please reach out to us. We're fielding studies across the US. We test over 1,000 pieces of creative each year, and we want to help advertisers and brands figure out what this new situation needs to look like with their messaging. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. And Andrew, how can people learn about you and your work with the Cronkite School?
Well, we publish new content almost every week, new research, case studies about best or better practices, as well as experiments that we've done ourselves at Arizona State. Cronkite News Lab, all one word, .com is the URL, cronkitenewslab.com. And on that website, you can see our work and also get in touch with us. We read every email. We're eager to be responsive and interactive, and we'd love to hear from marketers who want to know more about where local television news is headed. Thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I'll close with an idea, Seth, that you presented, which is the disputing the notion of brand safety in the first place, especially at this level. It's been very clear to me since I think the time I joined Simulmedia that a notion of brand safety is oftentimes a concept or a construct that is built up very personally by usually someone of power who can preside over significant budget decisions and who oftentimes, understandably in a very human way, projects his or her own sensibilities on top of where a company and how companies should be spending advertising dollars. And my hope for today is, if nothing else, that people come away from this understanding how consumer attitudes are changing and how they have changed and how newsrooms are rising to meet the moment. And my hope is that advertisers and agencies looking at these two phenomena side by side see that now is not the time to run from news, but in fact to embrace it, not because it's a moral imperative, but because it can be done so effectively in a way that perpetuates the news and the newsroom ability to be able to give information that allows the public to develop the right point of view and to be informed and to stay safe, but also in a very self-serving way for brands to be able to achieve their goals. And we've seen over and over again advertisers do well when if they can, to be able to promote themselves and advertise in the right way, even in a downturn, that it's a way to set themselves up for future growth. And our panelists today, Seth Geiger and Nicole Bergen and Andrew Hayward, I think have made a very compelling case for the role that news, and especially local news, can play in that effort. So to each of the three of you, thank you so much for taking time out. This has been a wonderful conversation. And I want to thank all of you who've been watching at home or from your home office or wherever you happen to be. Stay safe, be well. We've got another live stream tomorrow. We are going to be on air with the U.S. CEO of Babbel, the language learning app, Julie Hansen. And Julie is going to talk to us about the extraordinary surprise that came to her business in a good way in the early days of the pandemic and now through it into whatever we describe as our next phase. She's going to talk about the surge of interest in language learning and what that means for our appetite for self-improvement, especially in a time when we're all making hard economic decisions. Can't wait to have Julie on. So until tomorrow, then, I thank you all again for watching. Thank our panelists once again for joining us. Can't wait to see you next time on Simon Media Live, everybody. Take care and have a good day. Bye-bye.